When Big Shaq stops for lemonade, a little girl's shaking hands and desperate eyes tell a story no child should have to live. This isn't about lemonade. It's about a family on the brink, a system built to keep them trapped, and a fight they were never meant to win. But today, everything changes. Because the world might have turned its back on them. Big Shaq won't. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun sat high in the sky, beating down on the cracked pavement like a relentless drum. The air shimmered with heat, rising from the asphalt in hazy waves. It was one of those days when even the shade offered no relief, the kind where people walked slower, seeking refuge in every possible pocket of cool air. Shaquille O'Neal, Big Shaq as the world called him, drove through the neighborhood with his windows down, the hum of his SUV's engine blending with the sounds of the street. His air conditioning was blasting, but something about rolling through a place like this with his windows up felt wrong. He wasn't a man who liked walls between himself and the people. This wasn't the kind of neighborhood where he usually spent his afternoons, but he had been in the area for a meeting, and something about these streets tugged at a memory. He had grown up in places like this, where the buildings leaned with exhaustion, where kids played with whatever they could find, and where survival wasn't always guaranteed. At a red light, Shaq's gaze drifted across the street. A few kids darted between parked cars, their laughter ringing out against the hum of the city. Further down the block, an older woman sat on her porch, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. The air smelled like asphalt, street food, and hard times, a scent Shaq recognized all too well. Then he saw her. A little girl, no older than 9 or 10, standing behind a makeshift lemonade stand. The stand itself was barely holding together, 2 wooden crates stacked on top of each other with a warped piece of plywood balanced across them. A faded sign read, "Lemonade, 50 cents. The letters uneven, some smudged as if they had been rewritten over and over. Shaq's foot hovered over the gas pedal, but something held him there. The girl was too serious for her age. There was no carefree summer energy about her. She wasn't laughing, wasn't calling out to passing people, wasn't acting like a kid running a fun lemonade stand. Instead, she stood there, stiff and quiet, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her gaze darting around as if waiting for something, or someone. A few cars rolled past, but nobody stopped. A couple of pedestrians walked by, barely sparing her a glance. Shaq frowned. Kids selling lemonade in the summer was nothing new, but this felt different. The light turned green, but instead of driving off, Shaq signaled and pulled over to the curb. He stepped out of the SUV, his towering frame casting a shadow that stretched across the stand. The little girl froze, gripping a plastic cup in her hand. Up close, Shaq could see the wear on her clothes, faded, a little too big, like they had been passed down. Her sneakers were scuffed, the laces frayed. She looked exhausted, but there was something in her eyes, determination, maybe even desperation. Shaq approached slowly, lowering his sunglasses. "Hot day for some lemonade, huh?" The girl nodded stiffly. Shaq glanced at the small pitcher on the table. The lemonade inside was pale, almost watery, like she had tried to make it stretch. A single ice cube floated near the top, already half melted. "How much?" he asked. The girl hesitated before answering. 50 cents. Shaq pulled out a $20 bill and placed it on the counter. "I'll take one." She didn't reach for the money right away. Instead, she poured the lemonade with careful, practiced movements, like she had done this 100 times before. When she handed him the cup, her fingers shook slightly. Shaq took a sip. It was warm, barely sweet, the lemon flavor weak. She had been stretching supplies. "You made this yourself?" he asked. She nodded again. Shaq set the cup down and gently pushed the $20 bill toward her. "Keep the change." Her hands stayed at her sides, her gaze flicking between the bill and Shaq's face. For a moment, Shaq thought she might refuse it. But then she did something unexpected. She looked around, scanning the street, her body tense. Then, she quickly snatched up the bill and shoved it deep into her pocket, like she didn't want anyone to see. Shaq's frown deepened. "What's your name, kid?" She hesitated again, as if even her name was something she had to think about before giving away. Finally, she answered, "Alana." Shaq nodded. "You out here all by yourself?" Alana glanced over her shoulder, toward a nearby apartment complex. The windows were shut tight, curtains drawn. She was waiting for someone, or hiding from someone. "I'm just selling lemonade," she said quickly, her tone clipped, too rehearsed. Shaq knew when someone was holding back. He had seen this look before, on kids who had grown up too fast, kids who had learned the world wasn't always kind. Shaq took another sip of the lemonade, letting the silence stretch. He had learned that sometimes, when you don't push, people fill the quiet themselves. And sure enough, after a long moment, Alana exhaled sharply, her small shoulders sagging. "My little brother is sick," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need money for medicine." Shaq's grip tightened around the cup. "How old is he?" he asked. 4. Shaq glanced back toward the apartment complex. "Your parents home?" Alana swallowed hard. "Just my mom. She lost her job." Shaq nodded slowly, his mind already working. He looked at the $20 bill still bulging in her pocket. She wasn't going to spend that on herself. She wasn't even going to celebrate making a big sale. That money was already counted for, already spoken for before it even touched her hands. Shaq had met a lot of kids in his life, but there was something about Alana that hit different. She wasn't just trying to make extra money for fun. She wasn't trying to buy a new toy, save up for a treat, or even contribute to a family fund. She was fighting to keep her world from falling apart. Shaq took a slow breath, watching the way she shifted on her feet, her eyes still darting around like she was expecting something to go wrong. There was more to this story. And Shaq O'Neal wasn't about to just drive away. The lemonade cup sat untouched in Shaq's massive hand, the condensation dripping onto the dry, cracked pavement below. The heat pressed down on them both, but Alana didn't seem to notice. She stood stiffly behind her rickety stand, her eyes darting between Shaq and the apartment complex behind her, like she was waiting for something, or someone, to appear. Shaq had seen that kind of nervous energy before. He had met plenty of kids trying to be tougher than the world around them, kids who had learned too early that childhood wasn't always a guarantee. He leaned against the side of his SUV, keeping his voice calm and easy. "So, Alana," he said, "you out here every day selling lemonade?" Alana hesitated, fingers tightening around the edge of the makeshift table. "Yeah." "By yourself?" She swallowed, then gave a small, quick nod. Shaq studied her. "Where's your mom?" Her grip on the table tightened even more. "Inside." Shaq glanced toward the apartment complex she kept looking at. The building had seen better days. Paint peeling, a couple of broken windows patched up with cardboard. The door to the front entrance was slightly off its hinges, like it had been kicked open too many times. Alana's face was unreadable, but Shaq could see it now. The exhaustion, the tension in her small frame. This wasn't a kid running a lemonade stand for fun. This was something else. Shaq shifted slightly, lowering himself just a bit to her level. "Listen, kid, I've been around a long time. I know when somebody's hustling for fun and when somebody's hustling because they ain't got a choice." Alana blinked. "I'm just selling lemonade." Shaq tilted his head. "For what?" She hesitated again, and for a second, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then finally, her shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of whatever she was carrying pressing too hard to keep up the act. "For my brother," she said quietly. Shaq's jaw tightened. "Your brother?" Alana glanced down, picking at a scratch on the wooden stand. "Yeah, he's sick. My mom..." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "She lost her job a couple of months ago. We're behind on rent, behind on a lot of things." Shaq stayed quiet, letting her talk. "I was trying to help." Her voice wavered, but she quickly forced it steady. "At first, I just wanted to get enough for some medicine. But then..." She trailed off, staring at the pavement. "Then I realized we needed more. So I just kept selling." Shaq exhaled slowly. He thought back to his own childhood, to his mother, Lucille O'Neal, working 2, sometimes 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. He remembered the way she used to rub her hands at night, too tired to even hold a fork properly at dinner. He remembered her counting pennies, stretching every dollar, making sure he never saw how bad things really were. But he had seen it. And now, standing here, looking at this little girl who should have been playing with friends, not carrying the weight of her family's survival, Shaq felt something deep in his chest tighten. "How old are you?" he asked gently. Alana straightened her back like she was trying to make herself taller. 10. Too young to be worrying about eviction. Too young to be rationing lemonade mix to make it stretch. Shaq ran a hand down his face, nodding slowly. He had seen a lot in his life, but this? This was the kind of thing that sat heavy on your heart. "You've been out here all day?" he asked. She nodded. "And your mom knows?" Another hesitation. She told me to stay inside. But I couldn't." Shaq raised a brow. "Why not?" Alana's jaw clenched. "Because if I don't do something, we're going to lose everything." She said it with so much finality, so much certainty, that it nearly knocked the air out of Shaq's lungs. This wasn't a kid who just felt responsible. This was a kid who was responsible. Shaq set the lemonade cup down on the table. "How much have you made today?" Alana glanced at her small cash box, then back at him, reluctant to answer. $7. Shaq frowned. "How much do you need?" Alana shifted on her feet. She wasn't used to people asking. She wasn't used to people actually caring. Finally, in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, she said, "A lot more." Shaq nodded, thinking. He could fix this in an instant. He could pull out his wallet, hand her enough to cover rent, food, medicine, everything she needed. But he knew better than that. Some people needed help. Others needed to believe they had a chance. And Alana? She was the latter. Shaq leaned forward slightly. "Listen, I respect the hustle. But this," he gestured toward the lemonade stand, "this ain't gonna be enough. Not like this." Alana's face fell, like she already knew but didn't want to admit it. Shaq rubbed his chin. "What if I helped?" Alana's head snapped up. "I don't need charity." Shaq smirked, folding his arms. "Good, 'cause I wasn't offering it." Alana frowned. "Then what were you offering?" Shaq nodded toward the street. "A real business plan." Alana blinked. Shaq tapped the rickety stand. "This? It's all right, but if you want to make real money, you gotta do it right." Alana narrowed her eyes, suspicious. "You know about selling lemonade?" Shaq grinned. "Kid, I know about selling everything." She stared at him for a long moment. Shaq could tell she was trying to figure out if he was messing with her. Finally, she sighed. "What's the plan?" Shaq chuckled. "All right, first things first. We need a new stand. Something that actually looks like a business, not something that looks like you stole it from an alley." Alana folded her arms. "I built this myself." Shaq held up his hands in surrender. "Hey, respect. But you want to make real money, you need to think bigger." Alana frowned. "How much bigger?" Shaq leaned against the table, his grin widening. "How do you feel about partnerships?" Alana eyed him warily. "Depends." Shaq laughed. "Smart. All right, listen, I got an idea. But you gotta trust me." Alana hesitated, then slowly nodded. Shaq clapped his hands together. "Good. Now let's get to work." The sun beat down on the pavement, turning the cracked sidewalks into a shimmering wave of heat. Kids ran barefoot through open fire hydrants, their laughter mixing with the distant hum of car engines. The neighborhood had a rhythm, an unspoken pulse of survival, of struggle, of people just getting by. Shaq had seen places like this before. He had grown up in one. This wasn't a neighborhood that forgave easily. It wasn't cruel, but it was relentless. The kind of place that took what it could from you and left you to figure out the rest. Some people got out, most didn't. Shaq leaned against his SUV, watching as Alana packed up her lemonade stand for the day. Her movements were sharp, controlled, too practiced for a 10-year-old. A few locals walked by, eyeing him with a mix of curiosity and caution. A millionaire standing on their street didn't go unnoticed. An older man sitting on a nearby stoop took a long drag from his cigarette before finally speaking. "She got you in her hustle now, huh?" Shaq turned, raising an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" The man exhaled a thin stream of smoke, nodding toward Alana. Kid's smart. Works harder than half the grown folks around here. But this place? He shook his head. It don't let go easy. Shaq crossed his arms, studying the man. His face was lined, his hands calloused, the kind of wear that came from decades of work with too little to show for it. You know her family? Shaq asked. The man sighed, flicking ash onto the sidewalk. Everybody knows everybody here. He hesitated, then added, used to be different for them. Before. Shaq narrowed his eyes. Before what? The man looked away, the weight of something unspoken hanging in the air. Shaq glanced back at Alana. She was too independent, too guarded. That didn't just happen overnight. He pushed off his car, making a decision. Thanks, he said. The man chuckled under his breath. Ain't nothing to thank me for. Shaq didn't respond. He just walked toward the apartment complex, the one Alana kept glancing at all day. The building smelled like stale air and lost hope. The stairwell was narrow, the walls covered in faded graffiti. Shaq had to duck slightly as he made his way up to the third floor, following Alana as she climbed each step like she'd done it 1,000 times before. She hesitated at the door, glancing up at him. She's probably asleep. Shaq nodded. I'll be quiet. Alana exhaled slowly, then pushed the door open. Inside, the air was thick and stiflingly warm. A fan hummed weakly in the corner, barely making a difference. The living room was small, cluttered with signs of exhaustion rather than mess, piles of unopened mail, half-eaten meals left untouched, laundry stacked in a basket but never put away. And then there was the couch. A woman lay there, her body curled inward, as if she had folded in on herself from the weight of everything. Shaq didn't need to ask. This was Alana's mother. Alana set down her cash box and walked over, kneeling beside the couch. Mom? She whispered. The woman stirred, blinking sluggishly before her eyes focused. She sat up fast when she saw Shaq. Who? Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. It's okay, Alana said quickly. He's just helping. Her mother rubbed her face, as if trying to wake up from a reality that had already beaten her down. Shaq stepped forward carefully. Ma'am, I'm Shaquille O'Neal. I met Alana at her lemonade stand today. Her eyes flickered with something, a brief spark of recognition, but it faded just as fast. She forced a weak smile. Did she hustle you? Shaq chuckled. Not yet. Alana's mother sighed, pressing her hands to her temples. I'm sorry. I don't usually... She gestured vaguely to the apartment, to herself, to everything. It's been a long few months. Shaq took in the details, the unpaid bills stacked on the counter, the eviction notice half hidden beneath them. How long? He asked. Her shoulders slumped. Since my husband died. Shaq had already figured as much, but hearing it out loud was different. She rubbed at her eyes. We were fine, you know. Not rich, but fine. Then he was gone, and so was everything else. Shaq nodded. He had seen this happen before, too many times. You work? He asked. I did. She let out a bitter laugh. But grief don't pay the bills, and neither do bosses who don't care. Shaq exhaled through his nose. Alana sat beside her mother, her small hands gripping the woman's arm, as if trying to hold her together. Shaq glanced back at the counter, at the eviction notice. How much do you owe? Alana's mother stiffened. I'm not asking to judge, Shaq interrupted gently. Just tell me the number. She swallowed hard. 3 months' rent. Shaq nodded. He could cover that in an instant. But before he could say anything, a knock at the door cut through the air. Alana's mother flinched. Shaq immediately noticed. Who is it? She called, her voice tight. No answer. Just another knock. Alana's eyes went wide and she instinctively reached for her little brother's bedroom door, as if she needed to protect him. Shaq's chest tightened. Something wasn't right. The knock came again, louder this time. Shaq stepped forward, placing himself between the door and the family. Then, in a low, controlled voice, he asked, You expecting someone? Alana's mother swallowed hard. No. The tension in the room was suddenly thick enough to choke on. Shaq turned toward Alana, whose hands were now clenched into fists. "Who usually knocks like that?" he asked. Alana didn't answer right away. Then finally she whispered, "People who want money." Shaq's jaw locked. The knock turned into pounding. And Shaq realized this wasn't just about unpaid rent. This was about something much worse. The neighborhood didn't forgive, and it definitely didn't forget. The pounding on the door didn't stop. It came in steady, heavy bursts, loud enough to shake the thin wooden frame. Shaq could feel the fear in the room. It wasn't just nervousness or embarrassment. This was something worse. Alana's mother stiffened, her fingers gripping the couch so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her breathing was shaky, uneven. She already knew who was on the other side. Shaq took a step toward the door, glancing back at her. "You want me to answer it?" She swallowed hard, hesitating before giving a small, almost imperceptible nod. Shaq's massive frame nearly blocked the entire doorway as he pulled it open. Standing there was a man who didn't belong. He wasn't a neighbor, wasn't a struggling parent just trying to get by. He was too clean, too polished for this side of town. His suit was sharp but not expensive, like someone who wanted to look legitimate without actually being respectable. He smelled like cheap cologne and cigarettes. And his eyes? Cold, ruthless, unforgiving. He looked up at Shaq, his lips twitching into something between a smirk and a sneer. "Well," he said, tilting his head, "you're new." Shaq didn't blink. "And you are." The man exhaled through his nose, amused. "I'm the man making sure this family doesn't live here for free." He leaned slightly to the side, trying to catch a glimpse of the woman behind Shaq. "Isn't that right, Gabrielle?" Shaq felt her flinch without even turning around. Gabrielle. That was her name. Alana's mother stood, forcing herself to step forward. She looked tired, beyond tired. Like someone who had been fighting for so long, she forgot what it felt like to win. "Mr. Bowen," she said, her voice strained. "I told you. I just need a little more time." The man, Bowen, sighed dramatically, shaking his head. "Gabrielle, Gabrielle, Gabrielle." He tutted, like a disappointed teacher scolding a failing student. "I've been very patient, 3 months patient." Shaq's jaw tightened. Bowen turned back to Shaq, sizing him up. "She tell you how much she owes?" Shaq crossed his arms. "I didn't ask." Bowen's smirk widened. "Of course you didn't, because you're just passing through, right? Gonna throw a little charity around and drive back to your nice life?" Shaq said nothing. Bowen rocked back on his heels. "You know, I actually admire people like you. You see a sad story and suddenly, you want to be the hero." His expression darkened. "But this ain't a story, it's a contract." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and flicked it open. 3 months' rent. Overdue. He tapped the bottom. "And let's not forget the interest." Gabrielle's face paled. "Interest?" Bowen nodded. "You really think I'm gonna float you this long for free?" Shaq took a deep breath, keeping his voice calm. "How much?" Bowen smiled. "With interest?" 8 grand. Gabrielle let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. 8? What? How? Bowen shrugged. "Late fees. Additional charges." He tucked the paper back into his pocket. "You know how it works." Shaq narrowed his eyes. "This is a low-income neighborhood. Charging that kind of interest isn't just unethical, it's predatory." Bowen tilted his head, mockingly thoughtful. "Unethical? Maybe. But it's legal, and in exactly 1 week, if I don't have my money, she's out." Gabrielle looked away, her body shaking. She had nothing left to fight with. Shaq kept his gaze locked on Bowen. "I'll pay it," Gabrielle gasped. "Shaq." Bowen's smirk faltered. He hadn't expected that. He had expected begging, not power. But then he chuckled. "That's cute, but, you see..." He leaned in slightly. "Rent isn't her only problem." Shaq's stomach tightened. Gabrielle's hands clenched into fists. "Don't." Bowen ignored her. "Her husband's medical bills? The ones that didn't magically disappear when he did?" He raised an eyebrow. "She still owes on those." Gabrielle's breath hitched. "That's not my concern." Bowen finished for her. Sure, but it's someone's. Shaq's entire body went rigid. This wasn't just about past due rent. This was bigger. Let me guess, Shaq said slowly. Not just hospital bills. Loans? Bowen grinned. Bingo. Gabrielle's voice cracked. They were supposed to help us. Bowen turned back to her, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. And they did. They helped you stay afloat when you had no other options. But the thing about borrowed time, Gabrielle? He leaned in slightly. It runs out. Alana clutched her mother's sleeve, her eyes wide, silent, terrified. Shaq could feel the desperation in the air. Who? Shaq asked. Bowen's smirk widened. Now. That's not your concern. Shaq took a slow step forward, towering over the man. It is now. For the first time, Bowen hesitated. His confidence didn't crack, but his posture shifted just slightly. Then, just as quickly, he let out a breathy laugh. Look, man, you got money, sure. And maybe you could make this go away today. He tilted his head. But what about next time? When the bills pile up again? When she misses another payment? His gaze flickered back to Gabrielle. Because we both know she will. Shaq clenched his jaw. Bowen exhaled, stretching his arms. I'm a fair man. She's got a week. If I don't have my 8 grand by then? He tapped the side of the door. She's out. Then, before anyone could speak, he turned and walked away. His polished shoes echoed down the hall. Shaq stood there, fists tight. Alana was still frozen in place, her breathing shallow. Her mother was shaking. The weight of it all crashed down at once. And Shaq knew, in that moment, this wasn't just about helping a single family anymore. This was about a system that was designed to break them. A system that never forgave. A system that never let go. Gabrielle let out a slow, shuddering breath, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to do. Alana turned to Shaq, her small fingers gripping his sleeve. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her eyes said everything. Don't leave us. Shaq inhaled deeply. He had promised himself a long time ago, if he ever had the power to change someone's life, he would. And right now, that power was his. But he needed a plan, and fast. Shaq didn't waste time. The moment Bowen left, he got to work. He knew what it was like to grow up one bad month away from losing everything. He had watched his mother, Lucille O'Neal, stretch every dollar, make impossible choices, and fight to keep their world from crumbling. He couldn't change the past, but he could damn well change this. The first call went to a trusted friend, a business owner who understood the struggle. Gabe, you still hiring? Always, came the response. You got someone? Shaq glanced at Gabrielle, who sat on the couch, silent and shaken. Yeah, she needs work, reliable, just got dealt a bad hand. There was a pause on the other end. Then, send her my way. One problem down. The second call was to a real estate contact. Someone who specialized in getting struggling families into better situations. Man, I don't need luxury. I need safe, affordable. Somewhere a mother can raise her kids without worrying about her next meal. Got a couple spots, the voice replied. I can make something happen. Shaq exhaled, 2 problems down, but something in his gut told him this wasn't going to be that easy. The next afternoon, Shaq drove back through the neighborhood. The air was thick with humidity, the sun relentless. Kids ran through the streets, dodging potholes and broken sidewalks, their laughter sharp against the sound of distant sirens. He turned onto the familiar block, where the lemonade stand had been. His stomach dropped. It was gone. Not just gone, destroyed. The wooden stand was smashed, pieces scattered across the pavement. The bright yellow sign, handwritten in shaky marker, had been ripped in half. The plastic cups littered the ground, trampled like they had been stomped on for fun. And then he saw her, Alana, sitting on the curb, shoulders shaking. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched something in her small hands. A crumpled dollar bill, the only thing they hadn't taken. Shaq felt something hot and unfamiliar curl in his chest. Rage. He parked fast, stepping out. Alana. She sniffed, wiping her face quickly like she didn't want him to see. I was only gone for a minute. Her voice was small, broken. I went inside to get more ice. When I came back, she gestured helplessly at the wreckage. Shaq crouched beside her. They take the money? A small nod. They hadn't just destroyed her stand. They had stolen everything she had earned. Shaq clenched his jaw, scanning the street. People were watching, but no one was talking. A group of teenagers lingered near a corner store, eyes flickering between Shaq and the stand. But they looked away fast when he met their gaze. Something wasn't right. This wasn't random. Someone wanted this message sent. Shaq took a slow breath, keeping his voice steady. Alana, do you know who did this? She hesitated. Then, just barely, she nodded. Shaq's pulse quickened. Before he could ask, a voice called out. Shaq, man, you might want to step back from this. He turned. An older man, mid-50s, salt and pepper beard, wearing a mechanic's uniform, leaned against a storefront, arms crossed. His name tag read, Eddie. Shaq stood, dusting off his hands. You know something? Eddie sighed, rubbing his face. Ain't about what I know. It's about what I can't say. Shaq stepped closer. Try me. Eddie hesitated, then looked around before lowering his voice. Not everyone in this neighborhood wants a way out. Some folks, they profit from keeping people stuck. Shaq's stomach turned. Bowen? Eddie let out a humorless chuckle. Nah, man. Bowen's small time. I'm talking about people who really own these blocks. Shaq's shoulders tensed. Like who? Eddie looked at him hard. What do you think happens when folks get desperate? When they can't pay rent, can't afford food? Shaq didn't answer. He already knew. They turned to people who promise quick fixes, Eddie continued. And those people? They don't want help from a guy like you. The words hung in the air. Shaq felt the weight of them. This wasn't just about one family. This was about a cycle, a system. And now? Shaq had put himself in the middle of it. Gabrielle wasn't answering her phone. Shaq's gut twisted as he pulled up to her apartment building. Something felt off. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, knocking sharply. No answer. He knocked again, louder. Gabrielle, it's me. Silence. Then, the door creaked open. Gabrielle stood there, face pale, eyes darting down the hallway like someone was watching. Shaq's stomach sank. What happened? She shook her head quickly. Shaq, you need to stop. His chest tightened. What? Tears welled in her eyes. They came here. Shaq's hands curled into fists. Who? Gabrielle swallowed hard. I don't know. 2 men. They didn't say much, just warned me. Her voice cracked. They said if I took anything from you, if I let you fix things, it would only make things worse. Shaq exhaled slowly. Gabrielle. She grabbed his arm, desperate. I can't risk it, Shaq. He looked past her. Alana stood in the hallway, watching. Her little face was tired, too tired for a child. Shaq crouched to her level, keeping his voice calm. Alana, tell me the truth. She hesitated. Then, quietly, she whispered, They don't want us to leave. Shaq's pulse thundered. This was bigger than a landlord, bigger than debt. This was control, keeping people dependent, keeping them trapped. Shaq looked at Gabrielle. You trust me? Her lip trembled. She hesitated, then nodded. Shaq took a deep breath. Good. Because he wasn't backing down, and whoever was behind this, they were about to learn who they were messing with. Shaq had faced pressure before, in championships, in business, in life. But this was different. This wasn't about making the right play. This was about breaking the rules of a game that was already rigged. And the man sitting across from him? He wrote those rules. The meeting was set in a private lounge, the kind of place where deals were made over expensive cigars and overpriced whiskey. Shaq had been here before, years ago, back when he was still a rising star, when he thought money and success were enough to escape the past, back when he thought people like this couldn't touch him anymore. And now he was face to face with Logan Vale, a name he hadn't spoken in a long, long time. Vale leaned back in his leather chair, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked the same, slicked back hair, custom suit, the easy confidence of a man who had never known struggle. Shaquille O'Neal, he drawled, swirling his drink. To what do I owe the pleasure? Shaq didn't smile, didn't waste time. You own the lease on Gabrielle Carter's place. Vale raised an eyebrow. That depends. Who's asking? Shaq's jaw clenched. You know who's asking. Vale chuckled. I suppose I do. He leaned forward, setting his drink down. Let me guess. You want me to forgive her debt? Maybe offer her a nice little payment to help her move on? Shaq didn't blink. That's exactly what I want. Vale sighed, shaking his head. Shaq, Shaq, Shaq. He tutted like Shaq was a child who didn't understand how the world worked. You can buy 100 cars, 1,000 businesses, a damn sports team if you want, Vale continued. But you can't buy your way out of the truth. Shaq's eyes darkened. And what truth is that? Vale's smirk sharpened. That people like Gabrielle don't win. Shaq's hands curled into fists, but he forced himself to stay calm. Controlled. He had dealt with men like Vale before. They thrived on power, on control, on the belief that no one could touch them. And unfortunately, most of the time they were right. Vale leaned back, studying Shaq like he was enjoying this. You think you're doing something noble? Vale mused. Helping one family, throwing some money at their problems? He let out a sharp laugh. It won't change a damn thing. Shaq's expression didn't waver. It'll change everything for them. Vale shrugged. For how long? A month? A year? He gestured vaguely. People like them, Shaq. They don't need charity. They need structure. His voice dropped, smooth, persuasive. They need someone who understands how to manage their limitations. Shaq's stomach turned. Limitations. That's what men like Vale saw. Not people, not families, just numbers in a system designed to keep them barely surviving. Because if they got ahead, Vale wouldn't get paid. Shaq took a slow breath. What do you want? Vale grinned. Now we're talking. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and slid it across the table. Shaq unfolded it. His gut clenched. The document was a lease termination notice, signed, dated. Gabrielle and her kids had 1 week before eviction. Shaq looked up, his voice low and dangerous. You already planned this. Vale smiled. Of course I did. The next words hit harder than a punch. I own her debt. Vale's voice was smooth, confident. Her lease, her job prospects. He leaned forward, enjoying himself. She doesn't work unless I say so. She doesn't rent unless I allow it. Shaq felt something cold settle in his chest. Vale's smirk widened. So go ahead, pay off her rent, pay off her debt. You think that'll fix everything? He chuckled. Because the moment you do, I'll make sure she can't rent anywhere else in this city. Shaq's jaw clenched. Vale shrugged. Of course you could buy her a house, but then what? How long before the property taxes stack up? Before an anonymous complaint gets filed, and the city takes it back? He tapped the table. You think helping her is kindness, Shaq. But really? His voice dropped, his next words laced with venom. You're just making sure she owes you instead of me. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Shaq had spent his whole life fighting for something bigger than himself. But now he wasn't just fighting against something. He was fighting against everything. Vale sighed, feigning disappointment. You're a smart man, Shaq. You know how this works. You don't change the system. You work within it. Shaq stared at him, his blood boiling. And if I don't? Vale's smirk vanished. Then they lose everything. Shaq exhaled sharply. This was the dilemma. Pay off a corrupt system and reinforce it, or let Gabrielle and her kids lose everything. There was no easy answer, and Vale knew it. He leaned back, waiting. So what's it gonna be, big man? Shaq didn't answer. Not yet, because there had to be another way. And he was going to find it. Shaq sat in his SUV, parked just a block away from Gabrielle Carter's apartment. The dashboard clock glowed 10:47 p.m. One night, That's all he had left. Tomorrow morning, Logan Vale's eviction notice would take effect. By noon, Gabrielle and her kids would be standing on the street with nowhere to go. Shaq clenched the steering wheel, his mind racing. He had spent his entire career solving problems, on the court, in business, even in his personal life. But this wasn't something he could buy his way out of. If he paid Vale, he'd be reinforcing a corrupt system. If he didn't, an innocent family would lose everything. There had to be another way, and he had until sunrise to find it. The neighborhood was eerily quiet at this hour. A few dim streetlights flickered, barely keeping the darkness at bay. Shaq stepped out of his SUV and walked toward the apartment. The air was thick, humid, heavy with the kind of tension that had nothing to do with the weather. He knocked softly. A few moments passed before the door cracked open. It wasn't Gabrielle who answered. It was her daughter. The same little girl who had been selling lemonade on the street. The same girl who had fought so hard to keep her family together. But now she looked defeated. Her small shoulders sagged, her eyes red-rimmed and tired beyond her years. She didn't even flinch when she saw Shaq. She just stared at him for a long moment before stepping aside, silently letting him in. Inside, the apartment was half empty. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, filled with everything they owned. Some were taped shut, others left open, as if they couldn't decide whether to finish packing or just give up. The eviction notice sat on the kitchen counter. Gabrielle wasn't there, probably out on her third shift, trying to scrape together money she would never have in time. Shaq turned back to the girl. "Where's your brother?" She pointed to the small mattress in the corner, where a frail little boy lay curled up, his breathing slow and shallow. Shaq's chest tightened. The girl followed his gaze, then looked down. "Mom says he's getting worse." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "The medicine's too expensive. She tried everything." Shaq kneeled so he was eye level with her. "She's not alone," he said gently. "You're not alone." The girl shook her head. "You don't get it," she murmured. Shaq frowned. "What don't I get?" She swallowed hard, then finally looked him in the eyes. "Everybody leaves." Shaq stilled, because in that moment, he saw himself. Not the man he was now, not the multi-millionaire, the Hall of Famer, the legend, but the kid he used to be, the kid who watched his mother struggle to make ends meet, the kid who had been told that the world wasn't built for people like him, the kid who had waited for someone, anyone, to step in and help. But nobody did. Shaq took a slow breath. "When I was your age," he said quietly, "I thought the same thing." The girl frowned slightly, confused. Shaq nodded toward the eviction notice. "I know what it's like to see one of those on the door. I know what it's like to watch your mom try to hold everything together while everything else falls apart." The girl's lip trembled. Shaq continued, his voice steady. "My mother, Lucille, she worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. She never asked for help, never let anyone see her struggle." He exhaled. "But I saw it." The girl blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. Shaq's gaze softened. "She thought she had to do everything alone, just like your mom does." A silence stretched between them. Then, the girl whispered, "What happened?" Shaq's throat tightened. "She made it," he said. "But not because someone finally helped her." His jaw clenched. "She made it because she refused to let the world break her." The girl swallowed hard. Shaq leaned closer. "But no one should have to fight alone." He held her gaze. "Not her, not your mom, not you." The girl's face crumpled, and for the first time she let herself believe it. Shaq knew one thing for sure. Vale wasn't bluffing. If he simply paid the debt, Gabrielle and her kids would become a blacklisted family. No one would rent to them, no one would hire her, and within a few months, they'd be right back where they started. But Vale had made a crucial mistake. He underestimated who he was dealing with. Because Shaq wasn't just rich, he was loud, and he had powerful friends. By the time Shaq left the apartment, it was almost midnight. He had made some big calls before, but this was the biggest. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a deep voice answered. "This better be good, O'Neal." Shaq smirked. "It is." The next morning, the world changed. Because when people like Vale ran their scams, they did it in the shadows. They relied on the fact that no one was paying attention. Shaq lit a damn floodlight. By sunrise, every major news outlet in the city was covering the story. Not just Gabrielle's eviction, not just Vale's slumlording, but the entire corrupt system. The payday loan traps, the backdoor deals with landlords, the way families like Gabrielle's were set up to fail from the start. And the kicker? Shaq wasn't just exposing it. He was tearing it down. A press conference was held on the steps of City Hall. Shaq stood in front of cameras, reporters, an entire crowd of people who had been ignored for too long. And he didn't just talk about Gabrielle. He talked about every family like hers. He called out every shady practice, every corrupt loophole, every name involved, including Logan Vale. And the best part? He didn't do it alone. Because while Shaq was speaking, a team of investigators, lawyers, and activists, all connected through his network, were already filing lawsuits, pushing for new regulations, making sure this wouldn't happen again. By the time Vale saw what was happening, it was too late. He wasn't just losing Gabrielle's apartment, he was losing everything. That afternoon, Shaq returned to the neighborhood. The lemonade stand was still gone. But the little girl? She was standing outside her new apartment. Gabrielle had the keys in her hands. A real home, a real chance, a future that wasn't built on fear. The girl looked up at Shaq, her eyes wide. "You stayed," she whispered. Shaq smiled. "Told you I would." And for the first time in a long, long time, she believed him. News stations were already running the story on repeat. Social media was ablaze. A viral video, captured by a local journalist who had caught wind of Shaq's battle, was circulating everywhere. It showed the rundown apartment complex, the eviction notices stacked on the counters of struggling families, and the shady business dealings that kept them trapped in an endless cycle of debt. But the most damning footage of all? The landlord himself, caught on camera admitting that his entire operation thrived on people being too poor to fight back. Shaq had made sure the world saw it. By noon, city officials were scrambling. The mayor's office issued a statement, distancing themselves from the scandal. Investigations were launched. Protesters gathered outside the landlord's office, chanting for justice. Lawyers specializing in tenant rights reached out, offering free legal aid to families who had been wrongfully exploited. And as for the man at the center of it all, the corrupt businessman who had tried to force Shaq into silence, he was nowhere to be found. Shaq sat in his car, parked just a few blocks from the lemonade stand that had started it all. He watched as news vans swarmed the area, reporters eagerly interviewing residents who had been too afraid to speak up before. It was chaos, but the good kind. The kind that meant change was finally coming. But for Shaq, this wasn't just about exposing a bad man. It was about making sure that one family, the little girl who had been selling lemonade just to keep her brother alive, would never have to struggle like this again. The knock at the door was hesitant, light, almost like the person on the other side wasn't sure they had the right to knock at all. Shaq opened it to find the girl's mother standing there, holding a brown paper bag in her hands. She looked different today, less tired, less weighed down by the world. There was still exhaustion in her eyes, but for the first time, there was something else too. Hope. I made something for you," she said, holding out the bag. Shaq took it, peeking inside. Cornbread, homemade. The smell of butter and honey filled the air. "You didn't have to do this," he said, stepping aside to let her in. She hesitated before crossing the threshold. The apartment Shaq had set up for them wasn't anything extravagant, but it was safe, clean. A place where her kids could sleep without hearing the sounds of arguments through thin walls or worrying about eviction notices appearing overnight. She glanced around, taking it all in. "I don't know how to thank you." Shaq shook his head. "You don't have to." She let out a small, breathy laugh. "You say that a lot." He grinned. "Because it's true." She studied him for a long moment. Most people would have walked away, or thrown money at the problem and left. Shaq leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Money doesn't fix everything. Sometimes people just need someone to stand beside them, remind them they ain't invisible." She nodded slowly. For the first time in a long time, I don't feel invisible. Shaq's chest tightened. That was all he needed to hear. The little girl stood in front of her old lemonade stand, now rebuilt, stronger, sturdier. A bright yellow sign hung from the top, but it didn't read lemonade 50 cents anymore. It read, "Dream big." Shaq watched from a distance, smiling as she poured a cup for an elderly woman who placed a crisp dollar bill in the tip jar. He knew she didn't have to sell lemonade anymore. But that wasn't the point. The point was that now, she had a choice. She wasn't selling lemonade out of desperation. She was doing it because she wanted to. And that changed everything. The landlord disappeared. The legal battles dragged on for months, but eventually, his entire empire crumbled. The families he had wrongfully exploited were given back their dignity, along with their homes, rent relief, and legal protection against future abuse. The little girl's mother secured a stable job, one that paid her what she was worth, with benefits that ensured she'd never have to choose between food and medicine again. And Shaq? He didn't stick around for the cameras, didn't bask in the headlines. He simply got in his car, rolled down the window, and gave the little girl a final nod. "Keep dreaming big," he said. And with that, he drove off, leaving behind a community that would never be the same again. The summer heat was just as intense as before, but this time, the neighborhood felt different. The air carried a sense of relief, of something lighter. Gone were the heavy stares of defeat, the hushed conversations of families on the brink of losing everything. Instead, there was movement, hope. Shaq pulled up to the same corner where he had first seen the little girl weeks ago, his SUV rolling to a stop under the shade of an old oak tree. But now, the lemonade stand wasn't just a makeshift table with a few cups and a pitcher. It had transformed. The rickety stand had been replaced with a sturdy wooden booth, freshly painted bright yellow with bold white letters that read, "Dream Big Lemonade." A small chalkboard sign underneath it listed flavors: classic, strawberry, even mango. And the biggest change? The girl wasn't alone anymore. A handful of kids stood beside her, each taking turns pouring drinks, handling money, and greeting customers. It wasn't just a lemonade stand. It was a small business, a community project. The little girl was running it like a leader, showing the younger kids how to count change, how to keep the line moving. Shaq leaned back against his car, watching for a moment. He could see the difference in her posture, in the way she carried herself now. Gone was the exhaustion, the quiet desperation. She stood tall, confident. She wasn't selling lemonade because she had to. She was doing it because she wanted to. He finally stepped forward, and the second she saw him, her eyes lit up. "Big Shaq," she called, waving him over. Shaq grinned, stepping up to the counter. "Heard this was the best lemonade in town. Thought I'd come see for myself." She smirked, wiping her hands on a small towel before grabbing a cup. "You want classic, or are you feeling adventurous today?" Shaq chuckled. "Hit me with the best you got." She poured him a cup of strawberry lemonade and slid it across the counter. Shaq took a slow sip, nodding in approval. All right, not bad. You sure you didn't steal this recipe?" She laughed, shaking her head. "Nope, learned it myself. Experimented a little." Shaq reached for his wallet, pulling out a crisp $100 bill. But before he could place it in the tip jar, she put her hand over his. "Not this time, Shaq," she said, shaking her head. He raised an eyebrow. "Not taking my money now?" She grinned. "Business is doing good. I don't need extra." Shaq's smile grew. That was all he needed to hear. A few blocks away, the family's new apartment was modest but comfortable. The peeling wallpaper and flickering lights of their old place had been replaced with fresh paint and warm lighting. The air smelled of home-cooked meals instead of stress. The girl's mother stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, watching as her daughter ran the lemonade stand from afar. Shaq joined her, sipping his drink. "You did this," she said, not taking her eyes off her daughter. Shaq shook his head. "Nah." "She did." The mother turned to him, her eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude. "You know, for a long time, I told myself things would never change, that no matter how hard I worked, how much I fought, life would always push us back down." She exhaled, shaking her head. But now I look at her, at my son, and for the first time, I believe things can be different. Shaq nodded slowly. They can, and they will. She smiled, the kind of smile that came from real relief, the kind that only comes when you know you're no longer fighting alone. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light over the streets, Shaq made his way back toward his SUV. "Hey, Shaq," the little girl called after him. He turned, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah?" She hesitated for a second, then grinned. "You're gonna come back, right?" Shaq chuckled, shaking his head with a smirk. "Always." And with that, he climbed into his car and drove off, leaving behind a changed neighborhood, a family that had found its way back to stability, and a little girl who would never again wonder if tomorrow would be worse than today. Because now she was in control of her own future. And all it had taken was one act of kindness to change everything. This isn't just a story, it's reality for millions. Families trapped in cycles they didn't create. Kids forced to grow up too soon. Systems built to keep people stuck. But here's the thing, cycles can be broken. Change doesn't start with someone else. It starts with you. So ask yourself, who's selling lemonade in your city, fighting a battle no child should? And more importantly, what are you going to do about it?